Thank you, Eliana. It's such an honor to be here and so empowering to see an all-Latina leadership panel. That's my kind of panel. So that was fantastic and certainly learned a lot. And thank you so much for the invitation. As a Princeton grad, I don't know if there are any Tigers out there in the audience. I'm particularly excited to be in the presence of this esteemed group of thought leaders and to have an opportunity to tell you a bit about my own background, but more importantly about a project I've been launching around the globe called New Voices. Again, my name is Laura Zelenko. I'm a senior executive editor at Bloomberg, where I have been a journalist for the past 29 years. Talk about going into the sunset. Let me share with you some of my story. In 1993, I was hired in Prague and given the opportunity to establish Bloomberg's initial presence in Eastern Europe and Russia. That involved sourcing and hiring reporters in the region, opening all the original offices in Prague, Warsaw, Budapest, and Moscow, and assigning, writing, and editing stories about the burgeoning post-communist financial markets. From the Czech Republic, I moved to Russia just in time to cover the government's debt default and currency devaluation in 1998. 3 years later, when I returned to the United States, I was determined to keep on writing about what I knew best, Eastern Europe and Russia. Well, fortunately, my managers had a very different vision. They put me in charge of Latin America. Initially, this was extremely intimidating to me, but in fact, it was the greatest gift I could have ever imagined. It was an incredible opportunity to learn firsthand about Latin American culture and to report on the important business and finance stories unfolding across the region. And unsurprisingly, I very quickly fell in love with the amazing people and places I encountered. In early September 2001, with my second child just 4 months old, I found myself on a plane to Argentina to start meeting Bloomberg staff in Buenos Aires, and then on to Brazil, and later Chile, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, and Mexico. What I valued most about my time reporting in Russia became instrumental in the way I covered Latin America. In fact, my expertise on distressed debt was invaluable when Argentina defaulted at the end of 2001. But more than that, during 5 years overseeing Bloomberg's Latin American news operations, I became fascinated with the people and culture. I learned to speak Portuguese, got comfortable dancing samba and salsa, and took part in many, many important interviews of government and corporate leaders from Bogota to Brasilia. Why am I telling you all of this? Well, because this background and my subsequent years leading big global teams taught me the importance of elevating coverage from outside the traditional financial hubs, for advocating for reporters in less developed markets whose stories are not always as easily understood, and importantly, amplifying the perspectives of underrepresented experts who are too often overlooked. And that takes me to New Voices. This initiative that I founded and my team now drives forward across the world focuses specifically on inclusive representation in our coverage. It began with a recognition in 2018 that just 10% of our guests we were bringing on Bloomberg TV globally were women. An equally low percentage of guests in US programming were people of color. And the numbers were hardly better when we looked at the representation of sources we were quoting in stories. The easy explanation was that we focus our coverage on an industry, financial services, that itself lacks diversity. But that explanation was an easy excuse. We knew we could do better, and we needed to be proactive as part of the solution. Now, the very core of this initiative is intensive Bloomberg-funded media training for senior women across business and finance in a dozen cities around the world, as well as Latinx and Black executives of all gender identities in the United States. The more than 370 executives who have been through this program already will tell you that beyond the benefits of receiving invaluable tools and tips from the training itself, is that it eased access to Bloomberg media platforms that had previously seemed out of reach. And I'm proud to say that our representation of female guests on Bloomberg TV globally has already more than tripled since we started. There are more and better conversations every day now on how to diversify our guest lists, and our coverage is better. Now let me explain to you in more detail the scope of New Voices. The initiative has three main components. First, a global database of female experts across business and finance, which is searchable and accessible across our newsroom. That database has grown from 500 names in 2018 to more than 7,600 today, and we aim to hit 10,000 by the end of this year. We have the ability to expand these search tools by race and ethnicity to build a definitive Rolodex of diverse sources for financial media. Second, we have tracking tools to hold ourselves accountable to quoting more underrepresented experts and stories. We look at this data regularly by reporter, by team, and by bureau. We also track representation on TV programs and report out those numbers to our managers on a weekly basis. We set goals and we make everyone aware when we reach them. As I said, we've more than tripled representation of female guests on Bloomberg TV globally since we started to over 30%, and we keep setting higher goals to push us forward. And finally, the media training. We realized that we had to do something urgently to break the systemic problems of companies pushing the same sources to us, and our journalists struggling to find alternative sources. The media training, which is 4-hour one-on-one media training for each person, bridges that gap and sends a message to the firms that this matters to us and to our coverage, that the paradigm of who gets to express their expert opinions needs to change. Let me be clear, we are doing this work because it makes us a better news organization. Diverse sourcing is critical to making the stories we tell better, more accurate, more fair, and ultimately more complete. And it is foundational to building the newsroom of the future. There can be many, many reasons why journalists find it difficult to diversify sourcing. Much of the time, we are on deadline and go to the person who's easiest to reach, who we've turned to in the past, who can give us a short, pithy quote, because we use them all the time. I've already mentioned we bring in guests more often than not whom the firm pushes to us, and that roster historically has favored white men. Sometimes we lack diversity because we set parameters for ourselves around earnings and try to only book CEOs. And of course, most of those in the US, at least, are white men, rather than thinking more broadly about the C-suite leaders. And again, the fact that the industry we are focused on most lacks representation gives us an easy excuse. But the finance industry is changing, and we as the financial media have a responsibility to do better, to help amplify the important and knowledgeable voices, such as your own, that remain in the background sometimes, to reach deeper into the diversity that does exist in the industry, and to identify the experts, fund managers, economists, senior corporate leaders who aren't getting this exposure they deserve on media platforms. And we as journalists need to be listening to. After the training, many New Voices participants not only appear regularly on Bloomberg TV, but on other media outlets as well. They are building a brand that helps them both within their firm and outside, and provides role models for the next generation to see. And for the firms, which keep saying they're committed to improving representation, they get the benefit of being better represented externally. And that, in turn, hopefully helps accelerate change. What does all of this mean for you? Well, we are about to launch our next cohort of Latinx executives of all gender identities for our media training program. We will be doing this at an event with the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. on Monday, in conjunction with their recent opening of the Molino Family Latino Gallery. Side note, if you're interested, please find me or Jill Ortiz, who's around somewhere, can also give you the information. I want to point you to the wonderful cards that the Alumni Society has put out with our website, bloomberg.com/New Voices. That's where you can find our application. We hope you will take a look and share this with your networks as well. Let me close by saying this is work that is not one and done. It's so easy to slip backwards. It's so easy to lose focus. But I can assure you, we at Bloomberg will continue to leverage our resources and our might to scale new voices and keep pushing for more inclusive representation across financial media. So thank you again for having me, and I'm going to turn it back over to Eliana.